Has your family ever received a phone call from your brother's principal discussing his interesting uses of body language in the classroom? Well, my family has. And let's just say it was quite the experience. Apparently, my brother decided to put his A-OK sign in a not so A-OK place, leaving the other students feeling very uncomfortable. His principal described his actions as ball gazing. One never realizes the impact of their body language until it's too late, or in my brother's case, when it shouldn't have happened at all. Body language has, does, and will continue to dominate the way we communicate. So today, we will tune into our body language and discover how to interpret it by first looking at gestures and facial expressions and how to use them to our advantage. Next, why body language is so powerful, and finally, why it's so important to be aware of the signals that your body is sending. See what I just did there? The classic 1, 2, 3 into a triangle hand gesture that literally everyone does on the national level. This is standard speech to body language, but can also be applied to the real world as well. Former FBI lead hostage negotiator Chris Voss states that understanding nonverbal communication is crucial. But why? Professor Albert Mehrabian theorizes in his book, Silent Messages, that a majority of communication is nonverbal. He shares that 7% is talking, 38% is your tone, and the other 55% is your body language, which now explains my brother's very negative consequences. But learning how to use your body language positively can help with more than just staying cool in middle school, but also how you talk to other people. Psychologist Amy Cuddy advocates in her book Presence that power posing for 2 minutes before any social interaction is possibly the best thing you could do. She shares, even though it may feel silly to pretend like you're Superwoman for 2 whole minutes straight, it actually changes the chemical makeup of your brain by producing serotonin, which in turn makes you more confident. Across the globe in Australia, Alan P. shares his ideas on body language, but a little bit differently, through his palms. He shares that when your palms are down, it implies authority, and when they're up, you become more welcoming and friendly. Notice how a pastor talks to his congregation. Arms out, palms up. Hallelujah! Showing both welcomeness and vulnerability. He also shares that pointing can be seen as a sign of command. Like when I tell my cat he needs to stay out of the trash. Even he listens to me. Aside from these gestures, facial expressions also play a huge role in body language. The most common being smiling. Smiling can be done in so many different ways. I can't possibly show you all of them, but I can show you 3 in one basic diagram. The awkward smile, the fake smile, and the genuine smile. #1 body language expert Mark Bowden shares in his TED Talk the importance of being inauthentic, how to tell a friend or a foe based on their smile alone. He shares that they have this genuine smile mixed with those positive eyebrows. It makes us want to talk to them because they look more friendly. But he also shares how some smiles don't have the same effect, like this one, which is just plain creepy. And I don't know anyone who'd want to see this the first time they meet another human being. Now that we've learned about gestures and facial expressions, we can explore the power that body language holds. Because it accounts for such a large proportion of communication, there is no doubt that we as humans won't mess it up. Jeopardy got put on blast about a year ago when former contestant Kelly Donahue flashed what looked like a white power hand sign on national TV. The New York Times states that 595 former contestants even filed a complaint to the show, denouncing the symbol because they didn't believe in what it meant. But after further analyzation, it came back that he was not, in fact, throwing up a white power hand sign on national TV, at least on purpose. Instead, a very awkward #3, as he also made a #2 and #1 every time that he won his episode. Aside from these negative consequences, we can see positive ones as well. Live Science describes this in one example of former President Barack Obama, who punctuated points with his hands, brought them back together to ground himself, and then interlaced his fingers, showing whatever he was saying coming together, closed, and united. Today, we see orators doing the exact same thing, because this works. works. But sometimes it can get lost in translation. Finally, let's learn why it's so important to be aware of the signals that your body is sending. In the United States, the most common form of showing aggression towards another human being is usually by giving them the middle finger. But where did this come from? According to BBC, the middle finger originated in the Greeks as a phallic gesture in reference to the male genitalia, which is why when you see it, or think you're going to see it, you become uncomfortable and has some conflicting thoughts about the person sending it to you and why they're doing it. But this hasn't always been like this. Before it became universal in Elizabethan England, it wasn't a problem at all. Instead, they just bit the tip of their thumb. Us in America were introduced to this with Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Whenever an enemy was about to approach, they just bit their thumb. Today, we see celebrities doing the same thing, but as a sign of attraction, like Emma Watson. Because yes, biting your own flesh is considered sexy. Apart from the middle finger, there are other forms of body language that are misinterpreted over time. One example being mooning. Mooning has been around for ages, whether we knew it or not. From the English mooning the Scottish as a war tactic, yes, Braveheart was wrong, to the 1500s with sailors mooning their trading partners, to Bart Simpson flashing his American-made posterior at the Aussies, to today, with college fraternity houses doing it to each other within their frats. It's everywhere, whether we like it or not. One infamous example, though, comes from 2004 with Randy Moss, who fake mooned the Packers after winning a game against them. While my dad may have thought that this was the greatest thing to literally ever exist, it resulted in some pretty negative consequences. And commentator Joe Buck even said after the game that it was a disgusting act performed by Randy Moss, and he was sorry that anyone had to see it on live television. So, when you were back in middle school mooning passing cars on your trampoline, just know it wasn't as funny as you thought it was. And some people can actually get hurt by these actions. Aside from these silly gestures being misinterpreted, we can see this in the legal system as well. One example being airport security. Airports try to detect terrorists based on their body language. But when the government tested TSA's ability to do so, it resulted in their budget being cut completely. Because the results concluded that out of this, only 47% of the time they were caught. And out of this number, only 1% of the 30,000 people brought in were actually convicted. And it wasn't major at all. It was a small drug offense or sneaking something else onto a plane. Nothing to do with terrorism. Aside from airport security's ill policies on detecting terrorism within their own airports, we can see this in the judiciary system as well, notably through courtrooms. One Jim Crow case comes to mind. Brandon Jackson was on trial to see if he was guilty of murder. NPR News interviewed Stacey Marks, who was a juror on his trial. She says, he was very overconfident, like he knew what he was doing. He made a lot of eye contact with all of us. He seemed calm, like he was acting. Because Brandon Jackson showed positive body language in a negative experience, people thought that he was acting, and in turn, gave him more negative consequences than needed. Brandon Jackson, when found looking to all accounts of facts, was proven innocent. But when judged based on his body language, he was proven guilty and is still sitting in prison to this day because of how he behaved in the courtroom, showing how unconnected we are and how we need to get better. Today, we tuned into our body language and discovered how to interpret it by first exploring gestures and facial expressions and how to use them to our advantage. Next, we learned the power the body language holds, and finally, why it's so important to be aware of the signals that your body is sending. Apparently, my brother didn't know any of this back in middle school. Because nonverbals account for 93% of communication, you would think we'd be a lot better at interpreting it. But as we've learned today, we're not. So make sure from this day forward that your A-OKs are actually A-OK. Because I don't think you or anyone else would want to have to talk with your brother and your parents about middle region gazing.